Imagine a world where wristwatches were considered weak, unreliable, and mostly made for women. Now imagine one young man looking at that same world and saying, "No, one day the wristwatch will become the most important watch in the world." That man was Hans Wilsdorf, and that bold idea, that was the beginning of Rolex. Today, Rolex is one of the most powerful luxury brands on earth. It represents success, precision, and status. But the truth is, Rolex didn't begin with gold, diamonds, or million-dollar watches. It began with doubt. It began with risk. And it began with one man who believed in something almost nobody else believed in. This is how Rolex's journey really started. Let's go back to 1905. At that time, the world of watches looked very different. Men mostly carried pocket watches. Wristwatches were seen as small accessories, fashion pieces, not serious timekeeping tools. People believed wristwatches were too fragile, too inaccurate, and too unreliable. And honestly, they had a point. Early wristwatches were not very precise. Most people didn't trust them. But Hans Wilsdorf saw something others didn't. At just 24 years old, living in London, he believed the future was not in the pocket. It was on the wrist. In 1905, he partnered with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, and founded a company called Wilsdorf and Davis in London. Their goal was simple, but incredibly ambitious: to create wristwatches that were elegant, accurate, and dependable. That idea sounds normal today. Back then, it sounded crazy. This was Rolex's first big challenge. How do you convince people to trust something they already believe is flawed? Hans knew branding alone wouldn't work. He needed proof, real proof. So instead of making cheap watches, he made a bold decision. He sourced small, high-quality movements from a Swiss manufacturer in Bienne called Egler, because he believed only Swiss precision could make his dream possible. This was a major risk. Swiss parts were expensive, building trust was slow, and the market was skeptical. But Hans wasn't trying to sell watches. He was trying to change how people thought about watches. That's a much harder job. Then came another important decision: the name. At first, the watches weren't called Rolex. They were simply sold through Wilsdorf and Davis. But Hans understood something powerful. A great product also needs a great name. He wanted something short, easy to pronounce in every language, easy to remember, and elegant enough to fit on a watch dial. After trying hundreds of combinations, in 1908, he registered the name Rolex. Just 5 letters. Simple, strong, timeless. Even today, nobody knows the exact moment that name was born. Some stories say it came to him while riding on a horse-drawn bus in London. Others say he simply wanted a name that sounded like luxury. Whatever the truth, it was one of the smartest branding decisions in history, because Rolex didn't just sound premium, it felt unforgettable. But a beautiful name wasn't enough. Hans still had to solve the biggest problem of all: accuracy. Because if Rolex wanted respect, it needed scientific proof. And in 1910, something historic happened. A Rolex wristwatch became the first wristwatch in the world to receive a Swiss certificate of chronometric precision from the official watch rating center in Bienne. This was huge. It told the world, this is not jewelry. This is precision engineering. And Hans didn't stop there. In 1914, another Rolex received a Class A certificate from the famous Kew Observatory in England, a certification normally reserved for marine chronometers, the most accurate timekeepers of that era. For a wristwatch to earn that, it was almost unbelievable. Suddenly, people had to take Rolex seriously. The impossible idea was becoming reality. But just as things were improving, another problem hit. The war changed everything. Business became harder, costs increased, import duties in Britain became heavy. Luxury wasn't the priority anymore, survival was. This became one of the most important turning points in Rolex history. Hans had to make a major decision: stay in London or move the company closer to the heart of Swiss watchmaking. In 1919, he chose Switzerland. He left England and moved operations to Geneva. Then, In 1920, he officially founded Montres Rolex S.A. This move changed everything. Geneva gave Rolex stronger access to Swiss craftsmanship, better production control, and a reputation connected directly to luxury watchmaking. It was a risky move, but it was the right one. Sometimes, the biggest success comes from knowing when to leave and start again. What makes this story so powerful is that Rolex didn't begin as a luxury symbol. It began as a problem-solving mission. Hans Wilsdorf wasn't trying to create status, he was trying to create trust. He fought against public doubt. He bet on an unpopular idea. He invested in precision when others ignored it. He chose long-term belief over short-term comfort. And because of that, Rolex became more than a watch company. It became a symbol of ambition, of discipline, of never settling for good enough. Today, when people see a Rolex, they see wealth. But behind that crown logo is the story of a 24-year-old man with a vision the world laughed at. A man who believed the future could be worn on the wrist, and he was right. That is how Rolex's journey began, not with luxury, but with courage. And sometimes, that's the real definition of success. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, because the stories behind the world's greatest brands are often even more fascinating than the brands themselves. And trust me, Rolex is just the beginning.